Um, Good afternoon, everybody. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah. My wife's half Jewish, so I should know that. Back in last Wednesday of November, 30th.
I think we're gonna need the microphone.
Okay.
And I have it switched off, Mark,
So the Mechanical Board of Rules, the secretary, Tracy Pack, contacts all the members of the board to make sure we have a quorum. And so what happened was, even though she confirmed to everybody, one guy didn't show up. And I'm not gonna say who it was, but he says, well, I'm on a job site and I can't make the meeting. Well, the thing about it was all these people, we had people who travel as far as Empire, Michigan, who was on the board. So we couldn't have a meeting. One of the problems is, Ken Leikinger knows about this, is the president of ACA had changed in the Skilled Trades Act, and we're getting a lot of people coming in, and we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, is for you to be able to, two things, that they're going back to affidavits by the contractors. So now we're getting people coming in that can't get affidavits saying they work for a contractor because of, what's the word I'm thinking of, Ken? Conflict of...
Well, they try to stifle the employee to remain unlicensed, that way he can't leave and go anywhere else.
else and start another company. And so that's the problem there. And the other problem is a lot of companies get bought out, or the contractor that they work for expired and assumed room temperature, I guess Russ Limbaugh used to say. So there's a problem there. But then the other kickback is now, if you want to write any of the service licenses, you have to have number 2 or number 1. I can't remember if it's 3 years or 1 year. I can't remember how the act is written. But it makes it very hard. You cannot, even though you've worked in the field and all those fields you want to test for in the exam, you can't write those exams until you've had number 1 or number 2 for a certain amount of time. So we're getting a lot of influx from people trying to apply around it, and we're still waiting for the Attorney General to give us an interpretation. All right, this seminar is just some items that I notice when I do kitchen plan review. Kitchen plan review is probably one of the more in-depth reviews that you have to do out there. There's a lot to cover in this, and I just want to highlight and go over some items that I do in as far as that goes. So this is probably not the whole picture. You might have additional stuff that you might want to look at, but this is some of the things I personally look at when doing kitchen plan reviews, and it's based on a lot of it's based on the code changes and things out there, and it's different. Right now, in our city, how many story building is that, Bob, for the OCC?
3.
They're building an addition with a powerhouse, a 3-story addition. They want to do a culinary arts school. And every floor there's hoods and equipment on all the floors. So I've just started doing the plan review for that. So let me see where my page is. Ken knows more about this than I do. What I require, even if it's an existing restaurant, I require that please show how the CO2 system storage complies with the International Fire Code IFC 5307. And then their code says required protection where carbon dioxide storage tanks, cylinders, pipe, and equipment are located indoors or rooms or area containing carbon dioxide storage cylinders, pipe and fittings, and other areas where a leaker can collect and provide it with either ventilation according to section 503s or an emergency alarm system. So what has happened here, and how long have they gone with liquid tanks now inside buildings, would you say, Ken?
It's been about 20 years they started, but
Right.
in earnest probably in the last 15.
I'd say the last 10 to 15, it's gotten aggressive.
And what you have to do, even though if it's an existing restaurant, a lot of times these systems are installed without getting the proper permits from the fire department or whatever. So you want to make sure that the existing system, if there is a carbon dioxide tank, even it can be even outside, but the piping can be inside. There's a risk and danger of oxygen depletion due to that. So that's one of the things I write up, and they have to come back to me, either saying that their tanks are the old-fashioned ones, they're just gas only, or they're only serving bottled drinks or stuff like that, and they do not have the tanks, or they make a statement stating that they will put in an alarm system according to this chapter. So, did you want to comment anything about that, Ken?
Yeah, there's a lot to that, but there's a lot of screw-ups on that whole thing. The reason they're not permitted is because the guys doing the installation are not licensed.
Right.
Okay, so need to hammer them on the licensing for the piping. It is process piping by definition. They need to have a process piping permit.
Okay.
Plain and simple. They need to have a plan review. And if you want to know the items that should be on a plan review, not that the code says that, but it's whatever you, the code official, needs to determine code compliance, is what should be on those plans, correct? Well, a good place to start is if you go to NFPA 1. It's not enforced, but NFPA 1 has provisions in there and lists what should be on the CO2 piping and tank installation. And
Okay.
that's what I use for my list. I want to see everything that's in there.
So are you saying that CO2 systems are under the process piping licensing act then?
Yep.
Under that, what ANSI standard would that be, the building product piping system, or?
Yeah, it's process piping, B31. Mark Niemer knows the most about process piping than anyone in here probably.
B31? I got a copy of that, yeah. Those are expensive too. They're that thin and they're like over $100, Mark, is that?
I had to spend about $6,000 when I applied for my B2, for my boiler license, and a lot of it has to do with process piping.
Oh, you said boiler? I contacted the state yesterday. I talked to Kevin Calcalay, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not. I hope I'm going down a rabbit hole here, I know that. But,
It's all relevant.
yeah. I had a contractor come in with a state boiler license, not the mechanical license, and he wanted to pull a residential boiler permit. And I told him, I think you need a number 1 under the Skilled Trades Act for mechanical. And his comment was, the most common comment was, oh, I do this all over, and I'm always putting resident. I says, I'll contact the state and see what they say. And sure enough, the state came back and said, for residential boilers, you do have to have a mechanical contractor's license with a number 1 classification. The state boiler license is for commercial only, they said. So it's just something new.
So is multifamily considered
Um,
commercial? or residential?
They said single-family dwelling units. I know when does it kick in? Six units?
Five is the, five and less are 1.
Okay,
And anything over 5 would be.
okay, okay, so there it is. So Norwood, no, he used to work for the state.
And by the way, it doesn't matter what the BTU input is.
It doesn't?
So,
Oh, okay,
It used to. It
yeah.
doesn't
can
anymore.
I have more on that CO2 thing, just real quick?
Real quick,
We can teach the whole class on it, but there's just some bullet points I want to throw out there. Number 1 is, the these beverage companies, they were the ones that were installing these systems for years with no permits, no licensing, and no detection, right? But who's the first one that holds their hand out that when we all of a sudden regulate and say you need a detection system, who's the first one that wants to install said detection system? The guy's been doing this work illegally for years.
Yep.
Is he qualified? No, he doesn't know what he's doing. They like to install those plug-and-play ones. So they brought a guy belonged to some fire inspectors groups. The guy came in and he says, yeah, these are pretty cool. You can just plug these into the wall and they're easy to install. And when he was done with his presentation, and I said, can I say something? And I went over and I unplugged it from the wall, and I said, yeah, and it unplugs just as easy as it plugs into. End of conversation. It is not, the audible visual should be just as intelligible, visual, audible as a fire alarm system. As a life safety system, we have to back up and ask ourselves, why is this system here? Is it here just to look nice, or is it supposed to actually do something? It's supposed to get people out of the building, notify people, right? Should be doing that. You can't do that with a little horn on the wall that sounds like your computer battery's low.
Yeah,
So,
to interject on that a little bit, I have 2 or 3 restaurants, and particularly a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Dearborn, and I made them interlock their alarm system with the hood system. So if there was a leak and that alarm went off, the hood system came on so we could evacuate and bring fresh air in, so we didn't have that environment. Because it was the only way I could physically get some of these restaurants to comply because of where the tanks were located in the restaurants.
well, yeah, and it says detection where leaks can occur and where leaks can accumulate. And if you have a crawl space or basement, it's gonna find its way down there. Even though there's no piping down there, you still need to have detection down there. There's a lot more to it than what these guys are making out. There's a false sense of security. Let's go one step further. What do you have in a walk-in cooler? Do you have ventilation air introduced into a walk-in cooler? How many beer kegs can you see in a walk-in cooler? About 100.
To piggyback on that, we just did we're in the middle of it right now, trying to finish it up, a Target store. Target is renovating most of their Targets around the country, and they are eliminating their standard refrigeration systems because now they're handling food products, and they are going to a huge liquid refrigeration CO2 system. And they have alarms on the doors of the walk-in coolers that tell you that, you know, there's a leak in that walk-in cooler. And I talked to the engineers down in Arkansas, and I said, we gotta have some more than this. I said, we have to have something on Target's side so that people are educated to what's going on. And the other thing I required is that if that unit sprung a leak inside when the detector went off, then I actually shut off a liquid line feed solenoid so the refrigerant leak would stop, the CO2 system would stop.
Okay.
Yep, that's all
So
in,
you're gonna see those in all the Targets.
and that's all in chapter 11, guys. It's all there. It's called refrigerated workspaces. That's what the title is.
Is that a sacrificial refrigerant or
No.
a compressor?
It's compressed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is a very high-tech system they're putting in, but we also agreed on a placard for the walk-in cooler.
Question, what type of test pressures did you test that system
Way
with?
high.
Because CO2 would have to be very high.
It was, I think, 800 pounds. I tested it at 1,500.
1,500 pounds. Wow. Okay.
Lots to think about.
Get,
Point.
another thing I always require, and I require this on most of my commercial, submit gas piping plans showing distances and inputs of appliances, and also the sizes. I should have put that down. And a lot of times you will see, especially on the cook line, the engineer or architect, whoever's doing the design, they'll just look at the spec for the fryer or whatever and see what size that line is. And they'll say, that's the size branch line that you need to run to it. Well, that's not how it works according to the branch design method. You have to take from the distance from the appliance to the meter as your distance and so your branch size may be bigger than what the appliance input line is.
Almost always is.
It is almost always, yes. And so what you want to do, you want to make sure that everything's properly sized, that they're giving you the inputs of all the appliances. Then also showing either, I don't like the scale, but a lot of times I like it when they show an actual chart and they'll actually show you how many feet that each appliance is from the meter, which is nice as far as that goes. But that's one of the problems I run across, and as far as that goes. And the funny thing is, when you go out and do an inspection, and then the gas piping's all undersized, it's not per plan, and you go back and says, well, didn't you see the plans? And their famous two-line words are, what plans? So that's why it's very important. Okay, this was a change in the 2015 code, and that is concerning, and I could teach like an hour on this, but we'll go over it real quick. Kitchen cooking appliance, type 1 or type 2 cooking hood, or the reasons for exemption per 507.1. What the code used to do, it would used to list the appliances that you didn't need hoods. Well, they took that away and basically said all cooking appliances need hoods, but here we have exceptions. And some of the exceptions are that it's been tested. What's that UL standard with the 5 milligrams or whatever of grease?
Well, it also matches up with the NFPA standard 920.
UL 710B.
Okay, with that requirement, it's more to it than that. And a lot of people don't know that. That test that UL does actually will tell you what type of meats or what type of stuff was tested with it. So if the test says boneless chicken, white meat, it was done in the test, and they're using it to cook hamburgers, that's not what the test says. So each manufacturer will actually tell you the UL test results is based on what type of foods it was below that threshold. Do you understand what I'm saying here? That they're not out of the woods. Yeah, so you gotta look and see what they're gonna use this vent-free appliance to cook or whatever. Then what you have to do is even if you have the code says if you have vent-free appliances, and this is in a UL bulletin, by the way, that the exception in that code reads, if you're not going with a hood, you still have to have an air conditioning system that can handle both the sensible and latent heat gains of those appliances. So in other words, they have to show you, what I say here is you have to, actually I asked for the calcs for that kitchen air conditioning. So, and then the third thing is we kick back, even though they have those appliances, they still need an exhaust system at 0.7 CFM per square foot of exhaust. It doesn't have to be a hood, it can be a general exhaust, but it has to be a minimum of 100 exhausts per appliances. And one of the bigger violations of these is Subway. They don't want to put any exhaust system where they have their ovens at. And I say, no, you still have to have at least 100 CFM for each of those cooking appliances. So where do you find this information? You always want to submit a kitchen list of all the appliances. And it'll list ovens, different types of appliances. Neil?
When they say we got it calculated into the heat load calculation to cool that amount of heat, would you then therefore ask for the manual J heat load calculation? to make sure that-
Yes, exactly. It wouldn't be manual J, it would be manual S, thank you, for commercial equipment. And you, not only just the equipment, but any ventilation requirements or anything, you want to see the whole picture to make sure the HVAC system can handle this. I remember during the code hearings, when they brought this thing through, I says, well, this is, I think, the first time that we ever required air conditioning in the code. Because with this system, they do have to, with these systems, they do have to air condition in the kitchen. And I've had some that they did put equipment in that was, and they had to go back and they had to add a mini split into the kitchen because they did not have sufficient coolant in the kitchen to handle the loads by the equipment. Ken?
Perfect example of why that's necessary. You all know how if you try to regulate anything at your local fairgrounds, you're gonna get your ASS kick.
Mhm.
Well, the only way you can really get it kicked is if it has to do with the fair itself. If it's other activities outside of the actual fair event, then it's not exempt. But what happens is the VFW, those poor people sit in there and they have this equipment not under a hood and it's like 140 degrees in the kitchen. There's people literally going outside taking breaks and shifts because they're totally overheated. And in Chippewa County, they had people taken to the hospital from heat stroke.
Yes. So that's,
Just because of that.
Wow.
so,
But Firehouse Subs is one, they'll have all those hot water baths where they dip all the meat in to warm the meat up. There's a huge latent load. All
right.
that- all
And
that water
in
flowing
the
out.
general statement in chapter 5 concerning kitchen exhaust, we do have to handle steam and heat, it says. So the way to do that is with air conditioning system. Provide information that all appliances regulated by the code is listed and proved. Certain kitchen equipment, especially those that are foreign made, some of the stuff is, especially some of this Asian stuff, is not listed by a listing agency. And you've walked into kitchens before, especially ethnic restaurants, and some of the I had one where they took an oven and got the whole oven out, and they cooked their ducks in there. And all they had was a manual lit burner going in there. It took a burner out of a, I don't know where they got the burner, but it wasn't a standing pilot. It was
That's
a-
illegal.
I know. And you light the burner, and that's how they would cook. They would cook their ducks or goose or whatever, you know. Remember Christmas Story? That duck was smiling at the guys and chopped the head off.
Mm.
So that was a type of restaurant. It was a buffet type restaurant. And I said, no, you can't have that. And then the other thing is the cut sheets will usually state the listing agency. Then, and I applied for a code change and it got knocked down. The code still allows for unlisted hood, but there is a ton of code requirements if listed. And we talked about this before, but I re-explained this to you. All those requirements for the CFM per linear foot in the code book and stuff like that, that is only for unlisted hoods, because the code still allows for it. I cannot remember in all my life even inspected an unlisted hood in all the kitchens I've seen, but they still have the allowances. They tell you how far it's supposed to be from the fryer and stuff like that. or the cooking equipment, the hood height and everything in the code book. And the CFM requirements are generally usually twice what's required by a listed hood. So if they are gonna go with an unlisted hood, then they'll have to show compliance to all those requirements to that hood, as far as that goes.
Mark, excuse me, I got a comment. Some occasion we run into a hood system that has already been listed at one time, but all the stickers have been wiped out. So how would you deal with this right here, this situation? Because of, when they do cleaning, greasing, and what have you. There's a sticker still there.
It's
but
an
there's no
existing
numbers on it.
hood?
Correct. Well.
You don't know if it's listed or not then.
It does have the NSF sticker, it's a captive air hood. It does have the cabinet on the side. It does have a job numbers, but they weren't able to provide the new stickers because
Were they able to provide the information though?
they didn't provide the cut sheet of that
Okay.
exact piece of equipment.
I would feel comfortable with that. And I think another slide concerned label and hoods if you just want to wait.
Okay. Well, we stuck with this sometimes. Yeah, we've been there.
Provide information that the cooking hood provided requires CFM per the type of cooking done. In other words, the cooking hood will tell you, and I'll talk about a second, it will tell you how many CFM are required depending on what type of cooking you're doing, light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, or extra heavy duty, as far as that goes. So you want to find out if that hood can handle the appliances that they're putting underneath it. In the next section, well, that's a double, hold on.
That was your code change anyway, wasn't it?
Yes, I'm proud of that. What happened was, if you looked at the labels, and Captive Air finally got online for me for that. I had a discussion about half an hour with them, with their headquarters. And what it was, the label used to tell you how many CFM per linear foot per temperature of the cooking appliance. And we don't deal with that in the code. We deal with a list of light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, and extra heavy duty. I says, well, that label, we'll see a slide here in a second, will have to state that on the hood, tell you that, so whatever the CFM per linear foot, and you make sure that on your balance report for the hood that it is providing that required amount of CFM for the type of hood requiring. Kitchen exhaust termination. In Royal Oak, this is a real big problem because we have, everything's crunched together, but there's, you want to know how far the exhaust is from air intakes. They're showing here on this plan, this is good how they did this. They're showing all the distances for it. Also, the exhaust has to be 10 feet from the property line. There is an exception, you can go down to 5 feet if it discharges not onto the property line. As far as that goes, it's discharged away, so if it's an upblast, then it's fine. But we have a lot of restaurants in Royal Oak that are in violation, and I wasn't there when they were put in, but they're discharging the kitchen exhaust fans right into the alley, and it can be quite a nuisance sometimes. So we want to make sure that they show you that the discharges are fine. I have some restaurants that can't even meet this requirement because the restaurant's not wide enough. So what I make them do on the plan review, I make them put the exhaust fan in the middle of the roof and be as far as away from the property lines as possible, because I would consider that a hardship, but at least they're better off than what they were before when they had the property line. kitchen duct clearances, this is twofold of what you want to do. I hate McDonald's. They build them out of wood, and they have kitchen exhaust ducts going up through the wood. But their hoods though are listed to be put on a combustible wall. They have something built into McDonald's builds their own hoods. But two things happen here. You want to make sure you have the proper clearances. And by the way, if we ever do adopt a new mechanical code, the NFPA 96 statements will be taken out as far as that goes, except for the one statement in the ICC code. Two things happen here.
Mark, you mean they won't be referencing NFPA 96?
They won't reference NFPA 96. They want to take that out and just go straight with the code.
And it will describe the restarts and installations?
Yes, there's enough code language there now. But the other thing, and I had this right now, there Hopcats moved in Royal Oak to another place, and they want to run the kitchen exhaust ducts. And it's non-combustible construction, but the kitchen is in the middle of the restaurant, and these kitchen exhaust ducts go through several other rooms before they go outside. So I wrote in my plan review, I said, this statement here, but then I put a note there. Also, any kitchen exhaust ducts that leave the kitchen area, they have to be enclosed either in a shaft or that wrap all the way from the hood to the outside. So the one contractor called me back and says, you know how much that's going to cost? And I said, I don't think cost has anything to do with the code except energy code.
Yeah, that shaft comment, that's driven from the building code.
Right.
So there's more on it in there if you want to look, but
Yeah.
anytime you have penetrations or raised assemblies, the building code will direct you to have a shaft over
Right.
anything else. But we can't put fire dampers in these, that's why they have to have a shaft.
That's correct.
Now, but the wrap, key there, they can't just wrap it any old method in the manufacturer's instructions. They have to follow the instructions, because there's several pieces to that manufacturer's.
Especially the clean outdoors is where I have a problem.
Yes, huge. So that they have to follow the instructions for a shaft alternative, because that's what that wrap is being used.
Right.
It's an alternative to a shaft.
That's correct.
They can't just follow the grease duct clearance reduction methods out of the manufacturer's instructions. They have to follow the shaft instructions. Completely different.
Right. So if the exhaust duct leaves the kitchen and goes through other rooms, it has to be wrapped from the hood all the way to the point outside. Here's another one that I always require, and your better engineers will show that, and that is submit tables showing how makeup air equals exhaust for kitchen exhaust. All kitchen exhaust must be included, and it says show makeup air. If they're using makeup air units, or if they're using the dining room HVAC, so it makes sure, sorry about the spelling, my spelling check is not working good on this. You want to make sure that they show it balanced out. It doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be close, so that it that we have proper makeup air for that.
Yeah, how often will they accurately describe the
Right.
sequence of operation? How they're interlocked?
Right. The word interlock is not correct here. According to section 508 in makeup air, it doesn't say interlock, and I used the wrong word, sorry about that. It says that the makeup air units and anything that has to do with makeup air has to automatically turn on when the exhaust fan is turned on. Because if you try to interlock the makeup air to shut down, the kitchen exhaust of the makeup air units running, you can cause worse things to happen than downdraft in appliances. And we'll talk about that in just a second here. So what they'll argue, they say, well, the thermostat will make sure that the dining room units that are used for the makeup air will run. And I said, no, they won't. All it does is somebody can take and flip it or change the program and says, I want it interconnected so that when the kitchen exhaust fan comes on, all the makeup air that is required, not only if there's a makeup air in the kitchen, but if they're using dining room units, which McDonald's is famous for. They don't have any makeup air units. They use the rooftop units in the dining room to make up the air for their kitchen exhaust systems. So I've always, when the McDonald's go on, I always make them hook it up. And the best way to test this is you shut down the thermostat out in the dining room, make sure it's not on or calling for heater coolant. Then you go turn the kitchen exhaust fan on, and then you go back out into the dining room and see if there's air blowing out of the register. If Merle, if that's not blowing air, you just write them a big red sticker, right?
Oh, double reinspection.
Double reinspection fee. Yeah,
And
so.
Doodle's Restaurant wasn't wired up like that, brand new place, and they opened before they had an occupancy permit. And they took 5 employees to the hospital by ambulance.
I had a White Castle that was done that way, and the employees in the kitchen got sick because of that. It was in Troy. So that's why we want to make sure that all the equipment, and they'll respond back. What they usually do is they'll actually show you a wiring diagram or put in a sequence of operation. So when you go to do the final, the contractor can't sit there and argue with you. That's the neat thing about when you do a thorough plan review. The contractor has no room to have any discussions about it. Says, all you got to tell them is, what's the plan say? And they'll say, well, it's supposed to be this way, this. So why didn't you do it? And he says, well, I didn't look at the plans. So. And we talked about this earlier, is cement heating cooling per ASHRAE 183, if it's required, especially if the exemption is not used in HIP gates, shall handle both latent and sensible gates. So this is just basically redundant of an earlier slide. Return air. I see this once in a while. It's not allowed in the kitchen when the HVAC unit serves other areas than the kitchen. If they have one heating and cooling unit for both the kitchen and the restaurant, which would be a pretty small restaurant, then you have to make sure that the return air is in the dining room. I don't see this too often though. This one is a big one, but we're getting away from this now because most of the water heaters are either induced draft or they're direct vent water heaters you're seeing in the kitchen now for kitchen use. In fact, did the health department one time not allow tankless heaters to be used?
Yeah,
For
one time they wouldn't.
they would, but now they do.
Because now they bank them,
Pardon?
they bank them multi.
Yeah.
Sometimes storage tanks on top.
What is the biggest violation do you have with tankless heaters? Mine is the manufacturers want 3 inches on the side, and they'll either put them next to each other or put them right up against the wall. And they just say, well, it's right in the instructions, it says 3 inches on each side. And so, but that's my biggest violation is the location, how they locate them. They think they don't need to have side clearance. So here what we have is in case the makeup air fails, and if we have any sort of appliances that are gravity vented, that we have to either install them in a room with an isolated room with outside combustion air being brought in, or we have to go with a direct vent appliance. Because if the makeup air fails or if it's not properly maintained, then we could go into a negative and a gravity vent appliance will start spilling out of the diverter. At one time when the health department used to have their own ventilation guide, they wrote this up in all the restaurants that you had to put the water heater in a separate room with door sweeps and everything else and provide combustion air. But now this is in the fuel gas code that you have to do that. So I'm not seeing too many gravity vented water heaters anymore in new restaurants. I don't know what you guys have seen, but maybe in a renovation you might come across this where they have water heaters put in.
Can you replace existing gravity vent ones?
Yeah, but you have to make sure that that water heater has a spill switch or some sort of way that if the makeup air fails, that the water heater will shut down.
We got a vent for you over here.
Pardon?
We got a vent for you, Mark.
What is that? Is that, whatchamacallit,
This is what happens
cellular core?
it is definitely cell core pipe.
Did they jump out the limit or something?
No, it's even worse than that. This is what happens when you hire a handyman instead of a licensed contractor. This was hooked up to a atmospheric gravity vent.
Oh, no. I had that happen in Detroit one time. A homeowner was too cheap to buy a power vent water heater, and he put a gravity vent water heater on that.
It's what happened was, a handyman did this work. We don't have pre-sale inspections in Canton, right? New homeowners bought the house. They were there roughly about a month. They had a private home inspector inspect the house as well. They kept smelling something burning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I had that happen once, and
That's scary.
I shut the water heater off right away and told them if they didn't get it fixed in 2 weeks, I was gonna post the house do not occupy because they didn't have hot water according to the plumbing code. Demand controlled ventilation. This is something out of the energy code. It was increased since the last change. There is an exception for this, and that is if it's not required for the dining room, if the outside air is used to make up the air for the kitchen. But anytime you have an occupancy greater than 25 people per 1,000 square feet, they have to have a demand control. So and what it is, and I don't have time today to go over it. What it does is has CO2 monitors that regulate how much outside air is being brought in based on how many occupants are in the room. You find this in restaurants and in usually churches and theaters have to have demand control ventilation, depending on how many occupants they have. Makeup air temperatures. This is something I learned at last code change here, and somebody mentioned this. I never realized this, but the makeup air has to be within 10 degrees of the room air temperature, and that's both for heating and air conditioning. That you have to also air condition the air. That's why I'm showing you a makeup air unit with refrigeration units. Now, in the commentary, there is a statement, and it makes sense, if the makeup air grills are right by the hood, right next to the hood, then you don't have to technically temper it. So that's what I'm saying here, is makeup air needs to be cooled, not only heated. In some cases, if the makeup air registers are kind of far away from the hood. Because that's how the code is read. I always thought it was just heating only. Kitchen exhaust duct between floors. We talked about this a little bit earlier, about the wraps and enclosure material. And there is an exception here that if it's going from the kitchen right up through the roof, and it's a one-story building, then it doesn't have to be wrapped as long as the clearance requirements are made. Okay, we're almost done here. Propane. All the commercial propane freezers, I mean, all the freezers out there right now, commercial, are being fitted with propane. And the problem with that, the refrigeration code has some things to say about it. Now, I hear people say, oh, but no permit's required because it's under a certain horse. There's a section the code says, even though a permit is not required, that the installation still has to meet the code. Well, here's what happens. It says here, in non-industrial occupancies, A2 and B2 fridge should not be used in a hypervalidity system where the quantity of refrigerant exceeds the shown table, and I'll show you the table in a second. Group A3 and B3 shall not be used except where approved. That word approved is italicized, and that's according to the AHJ, approved to you having jurisdiction. And then it says the total of group A2, B2, A3 shall not exceed 1,100 pounds. That means all the refrigerants that are being used in all occupancies cannot exceed 1,100 pounds total. Now, if we look here, the maximum permissible qualities of various occupancies, it states right here, institutional quantities of refrigerant. It says unit systems is 0. Public assembly is 0. And that's talking about groups A3 and B3 refrigerants, as far as those 2 zeros. So in hospitals and in restaurants where there's, if it's classified as assembly, propane is not supposed to be used. I got one more thing here. That was it. So in ASHRAE, ASHRAE 15, it says if it's less than 1/3 of a pound, it's okay. But then ASHRAE turns around and says if there's a conflict between ASHRAE 15 and the building codes, then the building codes take precedent. And ASHRAE 15 is a reference standard. So the reason why they're using propane, a flammable gas, is for global warming. So what we did, when I was taught back in the old days at Ferris State College, that the refrigerants we had then back in the 70s, they were not toxic and they were non-flammable. But now we're going back a full circle and using propane. So that's up to you. What basically, I have a Starbucks that's going in the Beaumont Hospital right now, and they're using propane in the freezers. And according to the chart, it's 0 pounds that is allowed. So I told the contractor, the engineer, if he could come up with an alternative to try to meet the code, that I would work with him. And I told him, I says, I would even entertain if you would, in that kitchen area. In fact, the kitchen area is where the propane is, doesn't even meet the allow for the table, because the size of the kitchen is small in Starbucks. And with institutional, the table gets cut in half as far as that goes. I said, if you would want to propose some sort of propane alarm system, I might be able to work with that as far as that goes. And then that propane alarm system be tied into the ventilation system or something like that, but they'll have to come up with an alternative. So I don't know what to tell you. I talked to Kevin Calcule, and even though these things are listed and everything, they're B-free refrigerants, and the only time you can use B-free refrigerant is basically when the authority having jurisdiction will approve them. So that's the case there. So, well, that's basically it for today. Are there any questions?
Mark, I got a question. Dishwashers and kitchens. Some dishwashers are low temp, some of them high temp.
High temp would require type 2 hood.
Okay, low temp. Some municipalities, they're still required to have a hood, even though it's a low temp.
For the manufacturer's instructions?
construction slash it's 120 degrees or less, and then they depend so much on chemical, they don't depend on hot water. How can we answer that? And even though in the code there's an exception, as long as you can integrate.
The code
load
doesn't,
there.
I don't think,
It does say something about
Yeah.
integrate the load into the cooling system
Right.
or the heating system itself.
but if the manufacturer's instructions are more stringent than the code, then the instructions take precedence. That's how you would do it.
All right.
All right?
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.